So, right, we have a paradox in that. By focusing on the problem of statelessness or the problem of exile, one enters into a diasporic problematic. Said, interestingly enough, takes up this idea of the diaspora as becoming a possible basis for a polity in the Middle East. And when after Oslo he embraced binationalism, by which he means a one-state solution, although let's keep in mind that Raz Krukanskin tells us that binationalism can take two forms, either as a one-state or as a two-state solution, with the idea that equality would have to be the principle that reigned in either one. Okay, that's what the commitment of binationalism would be. Said says in that book, thinking about Freud and Freud's own skepticism about Zionism, he writes about the unhoused and diasporic character of Jewish life that aligns it, and I quote, in our vast age of population transfers with refugees, exiles, expatriates, and immigrants. Okay, so it's a very specific kind of ethic and politic that emerges from that position. I mean, if this is the case, then Arendt is interestingly aligned with companies she may have never predicted or fully appreciated. And although she herself argues for the need for home and for belonging, she's very clear that you cannot build a polity, that is to say, a government, a state, on the basis of those particular needs. Right? So one could have needs for home and one could have needs for belonging, and they can be satisfied in all kinds of cultural and social ways, but they can never be allowed to be the basis of a state, of a polity, of a political organization, because populations are invariably heterogeneous. And if they are heterogeneous and if they are pluralities, then no one segment of a plurality can claim to be the exemplary national character for the state itself. A polity requires the capacity to live with others precisely when there's no obvious mode of belonging. Okay, so we have needs of belonging at home, but to live in a polity means to be willing to live with others we never chose, we do not know, who are different from ourselves, who may or may not seem to belong to us in very many ways. In other words, the unchosen stranger, right? The unchosen stranger, the ones we never chose, we never knew. And this is, I would think, also a little bit of an echo of Levinas. A little bit of an echo of Levinas, right? We have an obligation to the one who hinges on us, who's there, who's against us, up against us, adjacent to us. We never entered into a contract. We never chose that particular group. We never chose that particular person. But it's precisely the unchosen nature of the type that actually becomes the basis of the ethical and political obligation. And that was the problem with Eichmann. He thought he could choose with whom to cohabit. But in fact, cohabitation is an unchosen social domain. That's the point. So here's just a little polemical ending. I guess, I don't know if I've been polemical or not, I don't know. It seems to me, maybe I'll get to say this to Giorgio tomorrow, that in a time when many intellectuals have become fascinated with sovereignty and its subterfuge persistence in modern forms of constitutionalism, right? That's the story. Modern forms of constitutionalism appear to have overcome sovereignty, but it turns out there's always a sovereign function, and that sovereign function comes up in states of emergency and suspends the law as it so wishes, hence Guantanamo. I think we've become accustomed to the argument that modern constitutions retain this sovereign function, both Schmidt and Agamben have argued this, and to a certain extent, it is a good description of some of what happens. But I think federated power, the notion of federalism, which is Arendt's version of binationalism, is enacted as a critique of sovereignty and as, I would say, a political experiment that seeks to do away with sovereignty altogether. So when, for instance, she proposed binationalism on a federated basis in the late 40s for Israel-Palestine, she imagined smaller groups of self-governing territories working together through a federated authority, initially overseen by United Nations and then left to its own devices, but collective, like a certain kind of collective self-governance. Now, of course, Agamben is indebted to Arendt's The Human Condition, as you know, in his elaboration of bare life. But for Arendt, what is important is statelessness, not bare life. Bare life is a kind of metaphysical concept, an idea of a life that's stripped of its political rights, that's naked to the world, exposed to whatever might happen to it. But statelessness is actually a condition in which power is very concentrated. This is not a metaphysically naked body. This is a body that is surrounded or saturated by social regulation, discipline, and power. So it's hardly metaphysically pure. It is under siege, if we think about occupation as an example. So the repeated and devastating expulsion of populations from the nation state produces a crisis that requires the rethinking of both nationalism and nation state. And by insisting, as Arendt did, that statelessness is the recurrent political disaster of the 20th century, which I think has now taken on new forms in the 21st century, along with genocide, she refuses to give a certain metaphysical cast to bare life. Indeed, I think the origins of totalitarianism would refute, in some ways, the parts of the human condition that Giorgio relies on. In any case, the point is that she sought to give a certain kind of vocabulary for a recurrent political destitution, and that was her issue. That was her issue. Okay. I think that's all I will say about this for now. You may have questions about what I said, or even about Taras Kropotkin. I'm glad to take it.
There are two different things I want to mention. First of all, is about the bi-nationalism. I think, in a way, it kind of presumes a symmetrical attitude towards bi-nationalism, whereas in reality, for example, the way Arabs now look at bi-nationalism is very different to the way Israelis now look at it, because they don't think they are symmetrical in their position towards that issue. And in a sense, if we even want to consider kind of democracy in Palestine, because, Palestinians now outnumber Israelis. So, in a way, Palestinians outnumber Israelis.
They outnumber,
in
yes.
So, the reason I'm saying that perhaps instead of bi-nationalism, one should look at something that is neither Jew nor Muslim, neither Israeli nor Arab, because if you want to forge a bi-nationalist state in Palestine or Israel, whatever, there are two obstacles. First of all, they are not looking symmetrically to the issue. I mean, Arabs feel that they are the ones who are underprivileged. Arabs have to accept to have that kind of bi-nationalism because, at the end of the day, the situation is not symmetrical.
Right.
The situation of Israelis and Arabs. And the other one is that, in terms of democratically speaking, as the fact that, we are having a very high population growth rate among Palestinians these days, and that's obviously a
I'm listening.
kind of